Well, a lot of people like to crow on about how rim brakes are really bad in the wet, and I actually have to agree. And I did actually have a community post where I actually highlighted one of the cons for rim brakes is poor performance in wet weather. And I suppose if you've been cycling for a while and you've had, carbon rim brakes and you've grabbed a handful and you've just sailed through the traffic lights, then you probably go, these things are just pretty bad. But is it all as bad as we all may think it is? So let's roll that intro and let's have a bit of discussion about rim brakes in wet weather riding. Well, rim brakes have different pads that have changed over the years, and many years ago on the carbon rims we had cork type pads so that they would wear and they wouldn't damage the rims. But technology's moved on from that. And now we have these polymer compounds that they make the actual pads out of. And there's been a few around, like Swiss Stop, and Swiss Stop have had Swiss Stop prints, and then there's the Reynolds brakes and Canon. I've tried quite a few of them. And the reality is that these pads do vary dramatically on their performance. You would think that when you actually look at these pads, the materials look very, very similar. And I've just got a couple here, and if you look, this one is Reynolds, and this one here is Prince Black, and then we've got the yellow Swiss Stop. And if you look at them up close, they actually do look very, very similar in the way they're made. But when you put them on your bike and you start riding, they vary considerably. Now, currently I'm running the Campagnolo Red. Now, these are by far the best pads that I've ever used in the dry. They just really incredible and give fantastic modulation, and they're really, really close to disc brakes, and the actual power, you don't want any more power with them. The power is the same as disc brakes. It's just the modulation, especially at the slower speeds, is not quite as nice as the disc brakes, but sheer out braking power, there's no difference. So that's in the dry. And also I've got these Reynolds pads here. They work pretty well in the dry, but I know Swiss Stop have got a pretty good name, but I actually have to say, from my experience, I found them pretty poor. And especially when it rains, these Swiss Stop brakes are pretty much really completely useless. You just can't really stop with them, and you can actually literally sail through traffic lights because you can't stop. And if you've actually used these, or you've had a similar type of pad to that, and you've used them on carbon rims in the wet, you're going to really think these things are actually dangerous. But I have tried some other pads, and with the ones I'm running on my bike now, the Campagnolo Red, they're actually exceptional in the dry, but in the wet, they actually perform quite poorly, but not as bad as the Swiss Stop. So we've established that carbon rims and rim brakes can be really quite dangerous in the wet, but can you actually increase the performance, or can the performance be reasonable if you actually change the pads? And the answer to that is yes. And I actually found a set of these pads that work really well in the wet, and they're these Reynolds Blue Cairo. And once you've been using something like Swiss Stop and you put these on, the difference is so dramatic, you actually can't believe it. It's massive. They do lose a little bit of performance in the dry compared to something like the Campagnolo Reds that I'm running on my bike now. But where they actually have a huge advantage is that the performance is only slightly reduced in the wet, whilst with the Campagnolo Red ones, the wet performance is pretty ordinary. So you can actually get pads that do perform. I mean, of course you need to try different pads to see, because they don't kind of advertise them as wet weather pads. So, it's a bit of a trial and everything. But the reality is, if you are having a bit of a problem with your rim brakes and, you're considering going to disc brakes because of the poor rim carbon performance, then give these a try, these Reynolds pads, because they're actually quite impressive. Well, anyway, from my experience, from what I found. So guys, give them a try and see what you think. I'd love to get your feedback on your rim brake riding in the wet weather. If you've tried different pads, what pads you've used, how bad they have been or how good they have been, because you know, if you leave that down in the comments, other people read those comments and they actually can pick up some information and make their riding experience better in different weather conditions. Okay guys, thanks for watching. That's the video for today, and I'll see you next vid. Cheers.